Hello everyone, Matthew Yu here. In today's video, we are going to talk about Power BI sharing options and how that works with the Entra ID. We are also going to chat about security and compliance recommendations. Our assumption for this video is you already have a basic understanding of the Power BI concepts like Workspace and apps, and all of the information is based on October 2024. Let's start with this architecture diagram for sharing with internal and external users with Power BI. There are two conclusions that you want to know. The number one is there are two services that is working with each other. One with your core Power BI service, and the number two is your Entra ID Active Directory. The Power BI is for authorization, and the Entra ID is for authentication. That being said, later when you try to work with your if you want to work with your security policy or checking what is wrong with the sharing, you usually need to have to align with both of the Power BI admins and the Entra ID admins, because these two services work hand in hand. The second conclusion is with the Power BI apps, which is usually considered as a read-only application. You can share with both internal and external users, and this is recommended way if you want to share with external guests. But for the Power BI Workspace, it is usually recommending to share that with internal users only. External users, it could work, but there are some caveats. With the number one is there's no licensing they can editing and to be viewing inside of the workspace, and you cannot invite them through the Power BI Workspace. We will later show a demo to give you more information. With that being said, let's start with one of the sharing route, which is to share with the apps to the internal and external users. And let's go into some details. Let's look at the right side of my screen. I have one workspace opened that is for the demo purpose, and I have one sample report that's inside of this workspace. And for sharing with internal and external customers, this is usually we recommend to using the app to share. And we already know we can click the create app or update app button at the top right. Then I type in my description, go into the content, and I'm going to be adding my content here as my report. And then the last part is I'm going to the audience. This is where let's have this discussion. The first thing here is the entire organization granting the access to. This one, if you click more to the Microsoft documentation, unfortunately, they didn't explain too much about the entire organization definition. Here, I want to give you the conclusion that we got from Microsoft. It is only for the internal users, and it will exclude all of the guests and external users. This is important because later you want to be answering this question with the security or your compliance team. So be aware of the entire organization is only internal, which is at yourcompany.com. All of the internal users from the left side of my drawing board. Let's go into the specific users and groups, and this thing is becoming very interesting. So the first thing about that is, we can absolutely share our Power BI apps with our internal users, which means I can type in Matthew@company.com or John@company.com. And also the best part is I can also put distribution lists and groups, which is make me easier to manage. The interesting part is with the external users, and let's go to talk about this a little bit. The interesting thing is, depending on your organizational settings at Power BI service and Entra ID level, if all of the access is opened, you can absolutely share with your external vendors, with your supplier, or even with a personal email address. That is no problem at all. Let's put in example as aaaa@gmail.com. And you must press enter for this to go through. And then I can type in another email address. And also the same rule, you must press enter to proceed. So what this do is there are two things that will happen behind the scene. Number one is if your company allows external invitation, Power BI app will on behalf of you call the Azure Entra ID and to invite that user. And then the second thing here is it will be granting access to this external user. Let me use this as a technical demo to show you what is going on. So first, let's go into the Entra ID to see what is on the backend. I go to my Azure console, and there's one module called user. I'm going to click into the user. This is a list of all of the users in my organization. And in this tenant setting, I can invite the external user because this button is not grayed out. And let me do a quick search of the random email that I put in there. You can see I couldn't find this user. All right, then I go into the Power BI. And then I click Publish App. And once I click Publish, what happened in the backend here? Let's look at the left side where it's loading. It is me as an internal user. And right now, I create an invite into an external guest. And now this external guest will be in my Azure directory. And now it is being granted to the access of this Power BI app. So what I'm going to show you is I go here again and I do a refresh. And now you can see I paste this address. This aaaa@gmail.com has been invited as a guest type in my organization. Your external users usually will receive some emails like this is, hey, someone has shared this app with you, click view app button. And when they view app, and the system will authenticate it as with a like MFA code, so to receive. So some examples like this. So this is at the backend what will happen. Of course, different companies have different policies. Some of them will try to be reviewing this list. Some of them will be disabling them after certain days of inactivity. So definitely it varies. But this record will definitely be there. So for a company later to check who invited this user and what this user has the service access, maybe Power BI, maybe Power Apps, or some other applications. So all the record will be in the user modules under the Entra ID. Let's come back to this module. So a couple of things, and as a security, you should already noticing. Number one is if the app owner wants to share with an external user, they must explicitly enter their email address in this box. With that, the second, the entire organization cannot give to the external users. This is by design because the owner did not explicitly allow the user to be reading this content. And this is the default setting. And I can tell you there's no settings that can allow external users to view any of the content without explicitly allow. With only one exception of Power BI embed, it is out of scope for today's conversation. And that one, I highly recommend to disable that, unless you have a very specific use case. With that being done, let's take a look at the Power BI workspaces. And the sharing is almost the same, with one thing that is different is you cannot create an invite through the Power BI workspace. So let's take a look. I'm going to cancel that out, and I'm going to manage the access. In here, I can add people and add group, and to give them the access for this workspace. So here's one thing that is very interesting. So if I have an external guest, and I put in @gmail.com, the system will not allow me. It will say, hey, one of the email address is outside of your organization. It is ccc@gmail.com. And which means you cannot even add this person. And even I press enter, it doesn't allow. But if this person I have already invited, and such as aaa@gmail.com. And see that is here. And now I can add them with any of the access, even with the admin. Usually at the workspace level, you could do that, but I highly do not recommend one thing. The first thing, it doesn't even work. The reason is, as a licensing requirement, if you want to edit any Power BI content, you need to have a Power BI Pro license. However, there is no such thing that usually we assign to the guest users as a Power BI Pro license, and they have no way to buy. This is number one thing. But if you really have the use case for editing with external, you could be contacting your admin or asset management, and they could make that happen. And the second thing is, of course, later you have to manually copy and pasting this workspace address to them and doing the authentication. Sometimes we see a lot of issues with the authentication because at gmail.com. So they definitely need to know the way to navigate around and to authenticate into your tenant. And the last thing is, of course, in the Power BI module, there is also report sharing. And of course, I need to first to selecting the specific people button and click apply. And then I type in the AAA. They will be able to find it as external user. But if I want to be just type in some random external address, I cannot invite them through this link. So the app would be able to do that for you. But overall, the app is a recommended way for sharing for your read-only content. And here, let's chat about the security and the best practice. That is, everyone should know the education. The number one thing is least privilege access. And this is happening everywhere, not only in the Power BI. It is you only want to share the content with the people that only relevant to that information. With that being said, the number two things is, for the entire organization, is that okay and is that not okay? First, I can tell you, Power BI admin can disable that, and some companies, they actually do that. So that is no problem. But there are some use cases which we understand that you want to share the holiday calendar, the recent code contest, any of that. It is entire organization, no problem at all. But the thing here is, you absolutely do not want to share confidential information to the entire organization. For example, you don't want to share the payroll to the entire organization. And if there is finance reporting related information, you are a violation of SOX internal audit. You will fail that control. And if you have PII and for like social security and the personal identification information, and you will be breaching GDPR. So with that, and this going to my next point is shared responsibility models. And we as admin, of course, we can know and we can call the APIs. We know who share with the entire organization. But you as the data owner, you definitely know what is inside of that data. And you can tell us, is that confidential, sensitive information, or that is a public information. And of course, we want you to share only with the people that are relevant to your audience. And if you say, hey, that is really entire organization, and we cannot judge your data because it is your data, your assets by the end of the day. And the next thing is about the external sharing. So will that be also an issue? So in general, there will be no issues. And the only problem is the action itself that you share with external is definitely in compliance. But the thing is, it could be increase the risk of not in compliance. Let's say, I know a lot of organizations, they have the restrictions where how you can invite the external guest, and you have to go into the security controls. But some organizations, you can just invite through an email, and then maybe they also do a 30-day life cycle cleanup and things like that. That is all good. And this is the only risk is if the business data that should be flow inside of the organization that be shared with externally. In Power BI, it is already known that you have to, as a data owner, to be explicitly allow the external users to view that data. So the assumption of that is you know who that is and you know the least privileged access. So with that being said, this is the same recommendation to everyone, is you definitely want to know who you're sharing with and to be reviewing who has the access of the data. If they don't need that, let's remove them. Of course, we as admin, we can also see like who shared that with which external users and how many external users people have already invited into this organization and to be reviewed and remind. But only you know who you want to share that with. Is a supplier, maybe a customer, or maybe some external third parties. But you should be making the judgment than admin asking you who that is. Of course, especially when you have GDPR and HIPAA and all of the internal and external audit and compliance control, be aware of who you are sharing that with externally. External usually means more risk to the organization. So with that, my last tip and trick that to everyone is when you share, and I recommend sharing that with a distribution list. Number one is it decreases your operational effort and you don't have to be manually adding and removing the people, and you're managing the team's group or you're managing your distribution list and you can control it everywhere. And some of the organizations, they even created the dynamic distribution list. For example, everyone that's reporting to Matthew, every contractor that is reporting to Matthew, things like that. It will dynamically change depending on the organizational structure. That is very recommended. And to a lot of places, people say, hey, I only want to share with someone's team. That will be super helpful if you have that kind of distribution list there, because it just like system ultimately updating that. And another tip and trick that you want to know is if you have to share that with individually, and this one trick that I usually do is you can go into the Outlook. And in the Outlook, and it's easier to type in the email address and everything. And you can type all of that and press Ctrl A and Ctrl C. And for you to easier to be copying and pasting that. And you can paste in those recipients into this email box. And that will make things easier. All right, that is all the content for today. I hope today's discussion and information is helpful. And I will see you in the next video.